The desert wind howled across the empty stretch between Las Vegas and Reno on March 15, 1990, carrying with it the kind of silence that only Nevada's wilderness could produce. Route 90 cut through the barren lands, beginning to cool, dipped below the horizon, painting the orange purple, soon give way to dark. The Sagebrush Motel, a rundown establishment 30 miles north of Tonopah, sat like a forgotten relic beside the highway, its neon sign flickering intermittently in the gathering dusk. Most travelers passed by without a second glance, preferring the comfort of chain hotels in the larger towns. But for those seeking anonymity or conducting business better left unexamined, the Sagebrush offered exactly what they needed. The motel's parking lot contained only 3 vehicles that evening: a dust-covered pickup truck belonging to the elderly proprietor, a late model sedan with California plates, and a black Lincoln Continental that seemed oddly out of place, modest surroundings. The temperature had already begun its nightly plunge toward freezing, and the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky above the distant mountain. Detective Sarah Martinez had been investigating the disappearance of Jessica Chen for 3 weeks. She first learned about the missing final note. The 28-year-old investigative journalist from Sacramento had vanished without a trace while traveling to Denver to meet a confidential source who had promised explosive information about government corruption and organized crime activities in Nevada. Her rental car, a blue Ford Taurus, had been found abandoned at a rest stop 50 miles south of the Sagebrush Motel, its doors unlocked and personal belongings scattered in the front seats, as if the occupant had left in haste. The Nevada State Police had initially treated it as a routine missing persons case, assuming Chen had encountered car trouble and accepted help from a passing stranger. But as days turned into weeks with no contact or ransom demands, the investigation had taken on a more sinister tone. Martinez, a seasoned detective with the Nye County Sheriff's Department, had been called in due to her expertise in cases involving organized crime, though at the time no one suspected Chen's disappearance would lead into the darkest corners of Nevada's criminal underworld. The journalist's editor at the Sacramento Tribune had provided crucial background information about Chen's investigation into suspected money laundering operations involving several prominent Nevada businesses, suggesting that her disappearance be connected to her professional activities rather than random criminal opportunity. The Sagebrush Motel's register showed that Jessica Chen had checked into room 12 at 6:47 p.m. on March 15th, paying cash for one night, as recorded by the proprietor, Bill Hendrick, an aging former prospector who claimed to mind his own business and see nothing worth remembering. According to Hendrick's initial statement, the young woman had seemed nervous, repeatedly checking her watch, glancing highway as if someone. Chen had asked specifically about phone access, mentioning she needed to call her editor to confirm her safe arrival and discuss the timing of her meeting with the mysterious source who had contacted her through encrypted communications. Hendricks remembered thinking it odd that a young woman traveling alone would stop at such an out-of-the-way location, especially given her obvious education and professional demeanor. But he'd seen stranger things in his 20 years running the motel and had learned not to ask questions that might drive a customer. The register entry would later prove to be the last verified record of Jessica Chen's existence, marking the beginning of what would become one of Nevada's most baffling and enduring cold cases. Security footage from a gas station 10 miles hotel showed Chen purchasing coffee at 5:30 p.m., appearing calm and focused as she reviewed notes. Leatherport was later found among her. The initial search efforts had been hampered by the vast expanse of desert surrounding the motel and the limited resources of local law enforcement agents. State police helicopters had combed the area for miles in every direction, looking for any sign of the missing journalist or clues about her fate, while ground teams searched ravines, abandoned mine shafts, and the countless dirt roads that branched off from the main highway like capillaries feeding into the desert. Local volunteers, organized by Chen's sister, who had driven from Sacramento when Jessica failed to check in with her editor as planned, distributed flyers and interviewed residents of the scattered community dotted the region, hoping someone might have seen something unusual on the night of March 15th. The search had yielded nothing but false leads and mounting frustration, as if the journalist had simply vanished into the desert air, leaving behind only question and the growing certainty that something terrible had happened in the darkness beyond the Sagebrush Motel's flickering neons. The case had been quietly transferred to the cold case files after 6 months of fruitless investigation. But Detective Martinez had never forgotten the image of Jessica Chen in her press credentials photo, smiling with the confident determination of a young professional who believed that truth and justice would ultimately prevail. Chen's laptop computer, found in her rental car, contained encrypted files that computer experts had been unable to access, suggesting that whatever story she had been pursuing was sensitive enough to require sophisticated security measures. What no one knew at the time, that Jessica Chen's disappearance had been witnessed by the one person who could never speak of what he'd seen without signing his own death warrant. Tommy Castellano, a low-level enforcer for the Lucchese crime family's Western operation, had been conducting surveillance on the motel that night, waiting for Chen to arrive so that he could confirm her identity before reporting back to his superiors about the journalist's investigation or money laundering. The organization had been monitoring Chen's activities for several weeks after learning from a corrupt source within the Sacramento Police Department that she was developing a story about criminal infiltration of Nevada's gaming industry and the complicity of state officials in facilitating illegal activities. When Chen had begun asking too many specific questions about financial transactions and attempting to interview witnesses who had knowledge of the organization's operations, the decision had been made at the highest levels to eliminate her before her investigation could expose their criminal enterprise to federal scrutiny. Castellano had watched from his concealed position as his associates had forced Chen from her motel room at gunpoint, herding her toward the black Lincoln Continental that would carry her to her fate in the desert's embrace, and the memory of her desperate attempts to negotiate for her life would haunt him for the next 34 years. The journalist's professional credentials and press identification had been taken as trophies by one of the killers, a disturbing practice that demonstrated the organization's contempt for the rule of law and their confidence that they operated beyond the reach of justice. The crime scene at the Sagebrush Motel had been meticulously cleaned by professionals who understood the importance of eliminating forensic evidence that might later be used to identify the perpetrators or reconstruct the events of that night. Within hours of Chen's abduction, a team of cleaners had arrived to sanitize Room 12 and the surrounding area, using industrial-grade chemical and specialized equipment to remove all traces of blood, fingerprints, and DNA evidence that might have been left behind during the struggle. The efficiency of the cleanup operation suggested advanced planning and access to resources that were typically associated with professional criminal organizations rather than opportunistic criminals, indicating that Chen's disappearance was the result of carefully orchestrated operation rather than a random act of violence. The motel's proprietor, Bill Hendricks, had been paid a substantial sum to forget what he had witnessed and to provide false information to investigators about the timing and circumstances of Chen's departure, establishing a pattern of corruption and intimidation that characterized the entire investigation. Even the local police response had been compromised, as the first officers to arrive at the scene were later revealed to be receiving regular payments from the criminal organization in exchange for advance warning of law enforcement activities and selective enforcement of laws to interfere with their operations. Detective Martinez's first breakthrough came 6 months after the initial disappearance, when a routine audit of the Sagebrush Motel's business records revealed discrepancies that raised immediate red flags about the establishment's true nature and its role in facilitating criminal activity throughout the region. The audit, conducted by the Nevada Department of Taxation, had uncovered a pattern of cash transactions that far exceeded what a struggling desert motel should realistically generate, suggesting the possibility of money laundering or other illicit activities taking place on the premise. Martinez had requested copies of all financial records dating back 5 years, and her analysis revealed that the motel experienced mysterious spikes in revenue that coincided with known drug trafficking routes through the region, pointing to its potential use as a way station for criminal organizations moving contraband between California and the eastern United States. The detective's growing suspicion that Chen's disappearance was connected to organized crime activities led her to expand her investigation beyond the scope of a simple missing persons case, bringing her into contact with federal agencies that had been monitoring the motel for entirely different reasons. Her request for assistance from the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force would prove to be the first step in unraveling a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Nevada's law enforcement and political establishment, though it would take years before the full scope of the corruption would be revealed. The financial analysis also revealed payments to various consulting service and security contracts that appeared to be thinly disguised bribes to corrupt officials who provided protection and advance warning of police operations. The federal agents assigned to assist Martinez brought with them a wealth of intelligence about the Lucchese family's Western operations, including surveillance photographs that placed known associates in the vicinity of the Sagebrush Motel during the time frame of Chen's disappearance. Special Agent David Chen, a 15-year veteran of the Bureau's Organized Crime Division, had been tracking the family's Nevada activities for over 3 years and recognized the motel as a critical link in their regional network of safe houses and operational bases. Chen's files contained detailed dossiers on dozens of individuals connected to the organization, including several who held positions of authority within Nevada's law enforcement agencies and had been providing protection and advance warning of police operations in exchange for substantial monetary compensation. The revelation that the investigation compromised within explained many of the early failures to develop leads or gather meaningful evidence. Corrupt officials had been systematically redirecting resources and suppressing information might have led to the discovery. Martinez and Agent Chen agreed to conduct their investigation using only federal resources and a carefully screened team of agents whose loyalty was beyond question, operating in complete secrecy to avoid alerting the criminal organization to their activity. The federal investigation had also uncovered evidence that the Lucchese organization had been systematically targeting journalists and investigators who posed threats to their operation, with Chen being only the latest in a series of mysterious disappearances and suspicious deaths that had eliminated potential witnesses and sources of information. Intelligence reports indicated that the organization maintained detailed files on dozens of reporters, law enforcement officials, and government employees, tracking their activities and assessing their potential threat level to criminal operation. The breakthrough that would eventually crack the case came from an unexpected source: the electronic toll records from Nevada's highways, which had recently been digitized as part of a statewide modernization effort designed to improve traffic monitoring and law enforcement capability. Agent Chen's analysis of the data revealed that the black Lincoln Continental spotted at the Sagebrush Motel on March 15, 1990, had been tracked by automated license plate readers as it traveled north on Highway 95 before turning onto a series of increasingly remote desert roads that led toward an abandoned mining district in the mountain north of Tonopah. The vehicle had been registered to a shell company with ties to the Lucchese organization, and its movements that night formed a clear pattern that suggested the transportation of contraband, or, more ominously, the disposal of evidence in one of the region's countless abandoned mine shafts. Martinez and Agent Chen organized a series of covert reconnaissance missions to map the area and identify potential burial, using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs borrowed from other federal agencies under the pretense of training exercise. Their search efforts were complicated by the vast size of the search area and the presence of numerous other criminal organizations that use the same region for their own illicit purposes, requiring extreme caution to avoid detection or interference from hostile elements operating in the desert. The toll records also revealed a pattern of regular trips by organization vehicles to the same general area over a period of several years, suggesting that the location was used repeatedly for disposal operation and might contain evidence of multiple crime. Cross-referencing these travel patterns, missing persons reports across the western United States revealed disturbing correlations that indicated the organization had been using the remote location as their primary disposal site for eliminating threats to their operation. The investigation's most significant obstacle proved to be the wall of silence that surrounded anyone with potential knowledge of Jessica Chen's fate, as word of the federal inquiry had somehow leaked despite the team's efforts to maintain operation security. Several potential witnesses died under suspicious circumstances before they could be interviewed, while others simply vanished from their usual haunts, suggesting that the criminal organization was actively eliminating anyone who might pose a threat to their security. Martinez received anonymous death threats at her home address, and Agent Chen's vehicle was vandalized with a message that left no doubt about the consequences of continued investigation into the matter, forcing both investigators to relocate their families' safe houses and operate under assumed identities for their own protection. The pressure to abandon the case came not only from criminal elements but also from within their own agency, as supervisors who were later revealed to be on the organization's payroll began questioning the allocation of resources to what they characterized as a hopeless cold case, no chance of resolution. Despite these obstacles, Martinez and Agent Chen continued their investigation, driven by a shared commitment to just the haunting knowledge an innocent journalist had been murdered simply for trying to expose the truth of criminal corruption in Nevada's government and business community. The intimidation campaign extended beyond the investigators themselves to include their families, colleagues, and anyone who showed interest in providing assistance, creating an atmosphere of fear that effectively isolated the investigation team from potential sources of support and information. The team's persistence finally began to pay dividends when they succeeded in placing surveillance equipment in several locations throughout the mining district, capturing audio and video evidence of ongoing criminal activities that provided leverage for developing informants within the organization. One of their most valuable sources proved to be Maria Santos, a former bookkeeper for the Lucchese family's Western operation, who had been providing financial services for the organization until her own safety was threatened by her growing knowledge of their activity. Santos had maintained detailed records of cash flows and operational expenses that included payments for cleanup services and disposal fees that coincided with the timeline of Chen's disappearance, providing the first concrete evidence linking the journalist's fate to the criminal organization's activities. Her testimony, given under federal protection after she agreed to cooperate in exchange for witness relocation, painted a picture of a ruthlessly efficient criminal enterprise that eliminated threats with cold calculation and disposed of evidence with methods refined over decades of illegal operations. The information Santos provided would prove crucial in obtaining the federal warrants needed to expand the investigation and begin building cases against the organization's leadership, though it would take several more years before they could move against the figure responsible for ordering execution. Santos also revealed the existence of detailed records that the organization maintained about their victims, including photographs, personal information, and documentation of the disposal methods used, suggesting that Chen's murder was part of a systematic pattern of eliminating threats rather than an isolated incident. The bookkeeper's cooperation came at enormous personal cost, as she was forced to abandon her entire life and assume a new identity in exchange for protection from an organization that had demonstrated its willingness to hunt down and eliminate anyone who betrayed their trust. The investigation took on new urgency when Santos revealed that the organization was planning to relocate their disposal op to a different area due to increased scrutiny from law enforcement agents, potentially destroying crucial evidence and making it impossible to recover Chen's remains or gather the forensic proof needed. This intelligence prompted Martinez and Agent Chen to accelerate their timeline and begin planning for a comprehensive operation that would simultaneously search the burial sites, arrest key suspects, and gather sufficient evidence to dismantle the organization's Nevada ops before they could complete their relocation. The planning process required coordination with multiple federal agencies, including the DEA, ATF, and U.S. Marshals Service, as the scope of the criminal enterprise extended far beyond the murder of a single journalist to include drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, money laundering, and corruption of public officials at every level of government. The complexity of the operation is further complicated by the need to maintain absolute secrecy until the moment of execution, as any premature disclosure would certainly result in the destruction of evidence and the elimination of witnesses who might be able to testify about the organization's activities. Santos continued to provide real-time intelligence about the organization's plans and activities, using her maintained contact with former colleagues to monitor their preparations for the relocation and identify the optimal timing for law enforcement. Her information revealed that the organization was also planning to eliminate several potential witnesses and informants as part of their security preparation, adding urgency to the investigators' efforts to protect these individuals while gathering the evidence needed for execution. The summer of 1993 brought a series of developments that initially seemed promising, but ultimately led the investigation team down rabbit holes that consumed precious time and resources without advancing their understanding of Jessica Chen's fate. A drifter named Marcus Wheeler was arrested in Arizona on unrelated charges and claimed to have witnessed the murder of a young woman matching Chen's description at a remote location in the Nevada desert, providing detailed descriptions that seemed to corroborate key elements of the investigators' theories about what had happened on March 15th. Wheeler's story was compelling enough to warrant a full investigation, including extensive interviews, polygraph examinations, and guided tours of the areas he claimed to remember as alleged crime. However, after weeks of intensive scrutiny, inconsistent accounts began to emerge, and further investigation revealed that Wheeler had access to newspaper coverage of the case and had instructed his story publicly available information in hopes of negotiating treatment. The revelation that their most promising witness was a fabricator dealt a severe blow to team morale and highlighted the challenges of investigating a case that had captured significant public attention, creating an environment where attention seekers and con artists were drawn to provide false information that complicated legitimate investigative efforts. Wheeler's deception was particularly damaging because it had consumed nearly 3 months of investigation time and had raised false hopes among Chen's family members, who had been informed of the potential breakthrough and were devastated to learn that it represented another dead end rather than progress toward finding their missing daughter and sister. The incident also demonstrated sophisticated that even petty criminals had developed about the case details, suggesting that information was leaking from official sources and reaching the general criminal population in ways that compromised the investigation's integrity. A more serious setback came when the team received what appeared to be credible intelligence from an FBI informant operating within a different criminal organization that suggested Chen had been killed in a dispute over drug territory and her body dumped in Lake Mead. The informant, whose identity was protected by multiple layers of federal security protocol, claimed to have overheard conversations between high-ranking members of the Chicago outfit's Las Vegas operations discussing the elimination of a journalist who had become inconveniently aware of their money laundering activities through Nevada's casino industry. This lead seemed particularly promising because it aligned with known patterns of body disposal used by organized crime groups operating in the Las Vegas area, and because the informant had previously provided accurate intelligence that had led to successful prosecutions of other criminal figures. Martinez and Agent Chen devoted 8 months to exploring this possibility, coordinating with underwater recovery teams, analyzing water current patterns, and interviewing dozens of individuals connected to the Chicago organization's Nevada activities. The investigation ultimately proved fruitless when the informant was exposed as a double agent who had been feeding false information to the FBI on behalf of the very criminals they were investigating. Part of a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to misdirect law enforcement resources away from the actual perpetrator. The revelation of this deception forced a complete review of the FBI's informant network and led to the discovery that several other supposedly reliable sources had been compromised, undermining years of intelligence gathering and forcing investigators to question the reliability of all their. The disinformation campaign had been remarkably sophisticated, involving the creation of false documentation, staged conversations, and carefully coordinated stories that were designed to waste law enforcement resources while providing the real perpetrators with valuable intelligence about the investigation's progress and method. The discovery that their own informant network had been penetrated and manipulated represented a devastating blow to the investigation's credibility and forced Martinez and Agent Chen to essentially start over with their intelligence-gathering efforts. The case took another frustrating turn when advanced forensic analysis of evidence collected from the Sagebrush Motel revealed traces of blood in room 12 that had initially been overlooked by the original crime scene investigators due to inadequate training and equipment limitations that were common in rural law enforcement agents during the early 1990s. The blood evidence was significant enough to warrant reopening the motel room as an active crime scene, with federal forensic specialists conducting a complete reconstruction of the space using techniques that had not been available during the initial investigation in 1990. DNA analysis of the blood samples confirmed that they belonged to Jessica Chen, providing the first concrete proof that violence had occurred at the motel, and validating the team's theory that the journalist had been abducted from the premises rather than simply choosing to leave on her own. However, the limited quantity of blood, the absence of other physical evidence suggesting a struggle or prolonged violence, indicated that whatever had happened in room 12 had been brief and controlled, consistent with a professional operation carried out by experienced criminals who understood the importance of minimizing forensic evidence. The discovery reinvigorated the investigation and provided new avenues for scientific analysis, but it also raised troubling questions about why such obvious evidence had been missed during the original crime scene processing, suggesting either gross incompetence or deliberate obstruction by corrupt officials who had been involved in the initial response. Further analysis revealed that the blood evidence had been deliberately concealed using sophisticated cleaning agents and techniques that were not commonly available to ordinary criminals, indicating that the cleanup had been performed by professionals with specialized knowledge of forensic countermeasures. The forensic team also discovered microscopic traces of industrial-grade cleaning chemicals that were typically used in professional crime scene cleanup operations, providing additional evidence that the journalist's abduction and murder had been carried out by a well-organized criminal enterprise with access to specialized resources and expertise. Perhaps the most demoralizing aspect of this period was the steady stream of false confession and misleading tips that arrived from across the country as media coverage of the intensive, creating an overwhelming burden of investigative work, strained the team's limited resources, and threatened to obscure genuine leads among the mass of fabricated information. True crime television programs and newspaper articles had made Chen's disappearance a nationally recognized case, attracting the attention of individuals seeking notoriety, attempting to divert suspicion from their own crimes, or suffering from mental health issues that compelled them to insert themselves into high-profile investigation. Each potential lead required careful evaluation and follow-up investigation, as the team could not afford to dismiss what might be genuine information. But the overwhelming majority proved to be either deliberate fabrications or the products of confused or disturbed mind. One particularly elaborate hoax involved a man calling himself the Desert Prophet, who sent detailed letters claiming to be the killer and providing information about the crime. It seemed to demonstrate inside knowledge, but was eventually traced to tired police who had become obsessed and gained confidential files, former colleague. The constant bombardment of false information created an environment of frustration and cynicism that threatened to undermine the team's effectiveness. Genuine leads became increasingly difficult to distinguish from the background noise of fraudulent claims and attention. The false confession phenomenon was exacerbated by the development of online true crime community, where amateur investigators shared theories and information about the case, creating an echo chamber of speculation that sometimes produced remarkably detailed fictional scenarios that appeared credible to inexperienced investigators. The team was forced to develop sophisticated filtering protocols to identify potentially genuine information while minimizing the time and resources devoted to obvious fabrication, but this process imperfect and occasionally resulted in the premature dismissal of legitimate leads, initially hoaxes. The investigation reached its lowest point in late 1994, when budget constraints and political pressure forced the FBI to significantly reduce its commitment to the case, reassigning key personnel to higher priority investigations and limiting the resources available for continued fieldwork in what was increasingly viewed as an unwinnable battle against a sophisticated criminal organization. Special Agent Chen was transferred to a counterterrorism unit in Washington, leaving Martinez to continue the investigation with minimal federal support and growing skepticism from her own supervisors about the likelihood of ever solving the case or achieving successful prosecution against the organization. The bureaucratic obstacles were compounded by the retirement of several key figures who had provided institutional support for the investigation, replaced by administrators who viewed cold cases as poor investments of limited resources that should be directed toward more recent crimes with better prospects of successful resolution. Martinez found herself fighting a two-front war, battling both the criminal organization responsible for Chen's disappearance and the institutional indifference that threatened to consign the permanent obscurity in the archives of unsolved crime. Despite these challenges, she continued her investigation on her own time, driven by a personal commitment to the missing journalist and a professional obligation to pursue justice regardless of the obstacles placed in her path by bureaucracy and corruption. The reduction in federal support was particularly devastating because it coincided with intelligence indicating that the criminal organization was planning major changes to their operation might eliminate crucial evidence and witnesses, creating a narrow window of opportunity that was rapidly closing due to bureaucratic indifference and resource constraints. Martinez was forced to choose between abandoning the investigation entirely or continuing her work without official support, knowing that her unauthorized activities could result in disciplinary action or termination of police that represented her livelihood and career. The personal cost of Martinez's dedication to the case became increasingly apparent as her marriage began to deteriorate under the strain of her obsession with finding Jessica Chen and bringing her killers to justice, while her relationships with colleagues and supervisors suffered due to her refusal to accept the official position the case was unsolved. Her husband, fellow detective James Martinez, grew increasingly concerned about dangerous enemies her investigation attracted and the impact around the focus on the case on their family life and financial stability. The couple's arguments about her priorities and the risks she was taking became more frequent and intense, ultimately leading to a separation that would become permanent when James was offered a transfer to another state and chose to accept it, rather than continue living under the constant threat of retaliation from organized crime figures who viewed his wife as a persistent threat to their operation. Martinez's isolation within her own department deepened as colleagues began to view her as a liability whose unauthorized investigation activities could expose them to retaliation or disciplinary action by association, forcing her to operate essentially alone in pursuing leads and developing intelligence about the organization's activities. The psychological toll of this isolation was compounded by the knowledge that corrupt officials within her own department were monitoring her activities and reporting back to the criminal organization, creating a paranoid atmosphere where she could trust no one and had to assume that every conversation was being monitored and every action was being reported to her enemies. Despite these overwhelming personal and professional costs, Martinez remained convinced that abandoning the investigation would represent a betrayal of Jessica Chen's memory and a victory for the forces of corruption that had turned Nevada's law enforcement into an extension of organized crime operation, providing the motivation she needed to continue her solitary pursuit of justice against impossible odds. By 1998, Detective Martinez had developed a network of unofficial contacts and informants that operated entirely outside the formal law enforcement structure, recognizing that the corruption within Nevada's criminal justice system made traditional investigative methods not only ineffective, but potentially dangerous to her sources. Her most valuable asset proved to be Vincent Torino, a former Lucchese associate who had fallen out of favor with the organization following a dispute over missing funds, and was now living under an assumed identity in a small town outside Phoenix, constantly looking over his shoulder for signs that his former associates had discovered his location. Torino had been present during several high-level meetings where the Chen operation was discussed, and while he had not been directly involved in the journalist's abduction and murder, his knowledge of the organization's structure and method provided Martinez with crucial insights into how they were planned and executed by professional criminals who viewed murder as simply another business tool. Through a series of carefully orchestrated meetings in neutral location counter-surveillance techniques that Martinez had learned through her own research and training, Torino began providing information about the key players involved, including the identity corrupt official who had helped cover up and the specific location the organization typically disposed of evidence, and his cooperation came at great personal risk, as discovery of his betrayal would certainly result in his death, and possibly the deaths of family members who remained within the organization. But his own moral revulsion at the murder of an innocent journalist motivated him to continue despite the constant threat. Torino's information was particularly valuable because it included details about the organization's internal communication, financial operations, and security procedures that were not available through traditional law enforcement intelligence gathering methods, providing Martinez with insight into how the criminal enterprise actually functioned on a day-to-day. The relationship between Martinez and Torino required elaborate security protocols to prevent detection by either law enforcement agencies or criminal organizations, including the use of encrypted communications, coded messages, and meeting locations that were selected to minimize the risk of surveillance or interception by hostile forces. The intelligence provided by Torino led Martinez to focus her investigation on a specific area of abandoned mines northeast of Tonopah, where the organization had historically disposed of inconvenient evidence and eliminated individuals who posed threats to their operation, transforming the remote desert location into an unofficial cemetery for victims of organized crime violence. Working with a small team of trusted allies that included a retired FBI agent named Robert Hayes and a forensic anthropologist from the University of Nevada named Dr. Sarah Kim, Martinez began conducting covert archaeological surveys of the area using sophisticated ground-penetrating radar equipment borrowed from academic institutions under the pretense of conducting geological research into the region's mining history. The search was complicated by the sheer number of potential burials in the region, as decades of criminal activity had turned the area into a disposal ground for victims from multiple criminal organizations operating throughout the western United States, requiring the team to carefully prioritize their effort based on Torino's intelligence about timing and methods used during the relevant. Their work was necessarily conducted during weekends and vacation time to avoid drawing attention from Martinez's supervisor, who had explicitly ordered her to cease active investigation of the Chen case and focus her energies on more recent crimes with better prospects for resolution and less potential for attracting unwanted attention from powerful criminal. The covert nature of their operation required careful coordination and extensive to ensure that their activities would not be to satellite surveillance, aerial reconnaissance, or ground-based observation that might be maintained by criminal organizations seeking to protect their disposal from law enforcement discovery. Dr. Kim's expertise in forensic archaeology proved invaluable in developing search strategies that maximized their chances of locating burial sites while minimizing the time and resources required for each search operation, allowing the team to systematically examine the most promising locations within the constraints imposed by their limited availability and security concerns. The archaeological work was physically demanding and emotionally draining, as each excavation carried the possibility of uncovering evidence of horrific crimes, while also risking exposure to the criminal organization that had used the area for their deadly. The breakthrough that would ultimately lead to the recovery of Jessica Chen came from an unexpected technological development. The installation of motion-activated trail cameras throughout the search area as part of a wildlife monitoring program conducted cover surveillance activity. Dr. Akui Kim had arranged for the department to place cameras in locations that coincided with potential burial sites, ostensibly to study the movement patterns of desert wildlife, but actually to monitor for any human activity that might indicate ongoing use of the area by criminal organizations seeking to relocate or destroy evidence. One camera, positioned near a cluster of abandoned mine shafts that matched Torino's description of a disposal site used in the early 1990s, captured images of several men conducting what appeared to be excavation work in the pre-dawn hours of a moonless night in October 1998. The images were of sufficient quality to identify two individuals known to be current associates of the Lucchese organization, and the timing of their activity suggested they were either disposing of new evidence or relocating material in previous buried detection by law enforcement agents that might be investigating. The discovery prompted immediate action by Martinez and her team, who realized that they might have only a brief window of opportunity to examine the site before the evidence was permanently destroyed or relocated to a location beyond their ability to access. The urgency of the situation required them to abandon their careful security protocols and move quickly to the location, accepting the risk of exposure in exchange for the possibility of finally obtaining concrete evidence of Chen's fate and the organization's disposal operation. The camera footage also revealed details about the equipment and methods used by the criminal organization in their disposal operation, including the use of industrial-grade excavation equipment and chemical treatment that were designed to accelerate decomposition and eliminate forensic evidence that might be used to identify victims or establish connections to their killers. Martinez and her team arrived at the site within hours of the camera's triggering, finding clear evidence of recent excavation, including disturbed soil, tire tracks from heavy vehicles, and tool marks on exposed rock surface that indicated systematic digging had taken place within the previous 24 hours. Using metal detectors and careful archaeological techniques, they began uncovering artifacts that told the story of the site's dark history: corroded firearms, jewelry that appeared to belong to multiple victims from different time periods, and, most significantly, fragments of clothing and personal effects that matched descriptions of items Jessica Chen had been carrying when she disappeared. The discovery of Chen's distinctive silver watch, still bearing traces of DNA evidence that confirmed its connection to the missing journalist, provided the first concrete physical proof linking her to the criminal organization's disposal operations and validating years of investigative work by Martinez and her allies. However, the site had been disturbed too recently and too thoroughly to preserve the intact burial that might have contained Chen's remains, suggesting that someone had been monitoring the investigation's progress and taking steps to eliminate evidence before it could be recovered by law. The excavation also revealed evidence of multiple burials that had been conducted over several years, indicating that the site had been used repeatedly by the organization for disposing of victims, and that Chen was only one of many individuals who had been murdered and buried in a remote desert. The systematic nature of the disposal operations was evident in the organization of the burials, a careful selection of locations that would be difficult to discover through conventional search methods, and the use of chemicals and techniques designed to eliminate forensic evidence and accelerate the decomposition process. The team's discovery of this evidence represented both a breakthrough in the Chen investigation and the uncovering of a much larger pattern of criminal activity that had claimed numerous victims over the course of many years, transforming what had begun as a missing person into a potential mass murder investigation, with implications that extended far beyond Nevada's. The realization that their investigation forced Martinez and her team to operate with even greater secrecy, adopting counter-surveillance techniques and communication protocols typically associated with intelligence operations rather than criminal investigation, while also accepting that their window of opportunity for gathering evidence is rapidly closing. They established a secure command post in an abandoned ranger station deep in the desert, equipped with encrypted communications equipment and supplied through a network of civilian contractors who were unaware of the operation's true purpose, allowing the team to maintain continuous surveillance of multiple sites without detection by hostile forces seeking to protect their criminal activities. The operation expanded to include electronic surveillance of known criminal associates, financial tracking of suspicious transactions, and behavioral analysis of corruption patterns within law enforcement agencies that might indicate which officials were providing information to the criminal organization about the investigation's progress and method. By the end of 1990, Martinez's unofficial task had assembled a comprehensive intelligence picture of the Lucchese family's Nevada operation, including detailed organizational charts, financial flow analyses, and evidence of criminal activities spanning more than a decade of operation in the region. but they still lacked the prosecutorial authority and resources needed to move against the organization's leadership or recover Chen's remains in a manner that would support successful criminal prosecution. The intelligence gathering operation had also revealed the existence of similar disposal sites in other Western states, suggesting that the organization's criminal activities extended across multiple jurisdictions and involved the murder of dozens of victims whose disappearances had been attributed to other causes or remained completely unknown to law enforcement agents. The scope of the criminal enterprise was far larger than Martinez had initially imagined, encompassing not only the murder of Jessica Chen, but an entire network of criminal activities that included drug trafficking, money laundering, political corruption, and the systematic elimination of witnesses and investigators who posed threats to their operation. The team's efforts to expand their investigation were constantly hampered by the need to maintain operational security while working with limited resources and no official authority to conduct the surveillance and intelligence gathering activities that were essential to building a comprehensive case against the organization's leadership. Martinez was forced to use her personal savings to fund equipment purchase and travel expenses, while Dr. Ali, Kim, and Agent Hayes volunteered their time and expertise without compensation, motivated by their shared commitment to justice and their recognition that the official law enforcement system had been compromised by corruption and political interference. The psychological toll of operating in constant danger while pursuing an investigation that had consumed years of their lives without producing concrete results was evident in the strain that appeared on all team members, but their discovery of evidence linking Chen's murder to a larger pattern of criminal activity provided renewed motivation to continue their work despite the obstacles and risks involved. The team developed elaborate contingency plans for protecting their evidence and continuing their investigation in the event that one or more members killed or incapacitated by retaliation from the criminal organization, including the creation of secure evidence cache and the establishment of communication protocols with external contacts who could continue the work if necessary. Their dedication to the investigation had transformed what began as a professional obligation into a personal crusade that defined their identity and consumed their lives, creating a sense of purpose that sustained them in the darkest periods of frustration and danger, while also isolating them from normal social relation career advancement that required them to focus on more conventional law enforcement. The dawn of the new millennium brought both technological advances that enhanced the investigation's capabilities and political changes that created new obstacles pursuing justice for Jessica Chen. As the shifting priorities of federal law enforcement and the increasing sophistication of organized crime operations combined to create an environment that was even more challenging for investigators seeking to solve cold cases involving powerful criminal organizations. Advanced DNA analysis techniques became available that allowed the team to extract meaningful genetic profiles from increasingly degraded evidence samples, while improved database systems enabled cross-referencing of criminal activities across multiple jurisdictions and time periods, providing new opportunities to identify patterns and connections that had previously been invisible to investigators. However, these technological advantages were offset by changes in federal law enforcement priorities following the September 11th attacks, which redirected resources away from organized crime investigation toward counterterrorism and made it increasingly difficult to obtain federal support for cold case investigation that did not have clear connections to national security. Martinez found herself fighting a constant battle to maintain access to laboratory and technical experts, often relying on personal relations and academic partners to continue advancing the scientific aspects of her investigation, while the official case file gathered dust in storage facilities that were being consolidated to make room for terrorism-related investigations. The shift in national priorities also affected the willingness of potential witnesses to cooperate with law enforcement, as the general public became more suspicious of government investigation and less likely to volunteer information that might bring unwanted official attention to their lives and activities, creating additional barriers to gathering the human intelligence that was essential to understanding the organization's current activities and planning effective counter. Post 9/11 security environment also provided the criminal organization with new opportunities opportunities to conceal their activities and intimidate witnesses, as increased government surveillance security measures created a climate of fear that made people reluctant to report suspicious activities or cooperate with investigations that might expose them to retaliation. Powerful criminal interest. Detective Martinez's personal life began to suffer severely under the strain of her obsession with the Chen case, as the endless frustration mounting obstacles took their toll on her mental health and family relationships, while the constant threat of retaliation from organized crime figures created an atmosphere of fear and paranoia that affected every aspect of her daily existence. Her marriage to fellow detective James Martinez ended in divorce in 2002, with court documents citing her inability to maintain work-life balance and her husband's concerns about the dangerous enemies her investigation had attracted to their household, forcing him to choose between his family's safety and his wife's obsessive pursuit of justice for a journalist who had been dead for over a decade. The divorce proceedings revealed the extent to which the case consumed. She had spent over $30,000 of her own money on investigation, had converted her garage into a command center filled with case files and evidence, and had alienated many of her colleagues through her insistence departmental resources should be devoted to what they considered a hopeless suit of a criminal organization too powerful and well-connected to be prosecuted. Her supervisors repeatedly attempted to reassign her to other duties, but Martinez used her vacation time, sick leave, and unpaid personal days to continue working the case, eventually forcing the department to place her on administrative leave, pending a psychological evaluation that would determine her fitness for continued police work. The psychological evaluation became another source of stress and conflict, as Martinez was forced to defend her sanity and professional competence while continuing to pursue an investigation that most of her colleagues viewed the product of an unhealthy obsession with an unsolvable. Her isolation within the department deepened as word spread about her psychological evaluation and her unofficial investigation activities, leading many officers to view her as a liability whose continued employment might expose them to scrutiny or retaliation for powerful criminal interests preferred to operate without interference or persistent investigation. The personal cost of her dedication extended beyond her marriage and career to include the loss of friendships, social relationships, and financial security, as her pursuit of justice for Jessica Chen consumed increasing amounts of time, money, and emotional energy while providing diminishing returns in terms of concrete progress toward solving the case or achieving successful prosecution. The psychological evaluation became another battlefield, war against institutional indifference and corruption, as the department-appointed psychiatrist seemed more interested in documenting reasons to remove her from the force than in objectively assessing her mental state and professional capability, raising questions about whether the evaluation itself was part of the criminal organization's efforts to eliminate threats to their operation. Dr. Marcus Webb, a prominent forensic psychiatrist with contracts throughout Nevada's law enforcement community, conducted a series of interviews that focused primarily on Martinez's obsessive behavior and paranoid ideation regarding the supposed corruption within her own department, dismissing her extensive documentation of suspicious activities as evidence of psychological instability rather than legitimate concerns about criminal infiltration of the justice system. Martinez suspected that Webb himself might be compromised by the same criminal networks she was investigating, a theory that gained credibility when her research revealed his financial connections to several individuals known to be associated with organized crime activities in the Las Vegas area, including regular payments for consultation services that appeared to have no legitimate purpose other than ensuring his cooperation in discrediting troublesome investigators. She refused to accept Webb's recommendation for psychiatric treatment and mandatory retirement, instead hiring her own independent psychiatric expert who concluded that her dedication to the case, while intense, represented a healthy professional commitment to justice rather than pathological, setting up a prolonged legal battle over her employment status that further delayed progress on the investigation while consuming additional resources that could have been devoted to pursuing leads and gathering evidence. The legal proceedings attracted media attention that brought unwanted publicity to the case and potentially alerted the criminal organization to the continued threat posed by Martinez's investigation, forcing her to operate with even greater secrecy while fighting. The battle over her psychological fitness became a public spectacle that distracted from the underlying issues of corruption and criminal activity that had motivated her investigation, allowing the organization's supporters within the law enforcement community to portray her as an unstable individual whose accusations should be dismissed rather than investigated. During this period of professional turmoil, Martinez received crucial support from an unexpected source, Jessica Chen's sister, Margaret Chen Thompson, who had never stopped searching for her missing sibling and had used her own resources to hire private investigators and maintain public attention to the case through media coverage and advocacy efforts that kept pressure on law enforcement agents to continue pursuing leads. Thompson had developed her own network of contacts within the true crime community, including journalists, television producers, and amateur investigators who were working independently to solve the case, and she shared their findings with Martinez in hopes of advancing the official investigation and maintaining momentum toward achieving justice for her sister. One of these amateur investigators, a retired software engineer named David Kim, had used publicly available data sources to construct detailed timeline analysis and geographic mapping that identified patterns in the criminal organization's activities that had been missed by traditional investigative methods, providing new leads and theoretical frameworks that proved invaluable in focusing the limited resources on the most promising avenue. Thompson's unwavering support and advocacy helped sustain Martinez through the darkest periods of her professional crisis, reminding her that the pursuit of justice for Jessica Chen remained a worthy cause regardless of the institutional obstacle and personal costs involved, also providing practical assistance in the form of financial support and access to resources were not available through official law enforcement channels. The relationship between Martinez and Thompson evolved into a partnership that transcended the traditional boundaries between law enforcement and civilian advocacy, as both women recognized that the official system had failed to provide justice for Chen and that alternative approaches were necessary to achieve their shared goals. Thompson's advocacy efforts also helped maintain public interest in the case, generating media coverage that occasionally produced new leads and kept pressure on law enforcement agencies to allocate resources to the investigation, despite the competing demand of more recent crimes and changing political priorities that favored other types of criminal investigation. The investigation reached a critical juncture in 2004 when Vincent Torino, Martinez's most valuable informant, was diagnosed with terminal cancer and decided to provide a comprehensive debriefing about everything he knew regarding the Lucchese organization's Nevada operations, including previously undisclosed details about Jessica Chen's murder and the broader pattern of criminal activities that had claimed numerous victims over several decades. Torino's final confession, recorded over several sessions in a secure location and witnessed by a retired federal judge to ensure its legal admissibility, painted a horrifying picture of the journalist's final hours and revealed the identities of all the individuals involved in her abduction, murder, and disposal, including specific details about the location where her remains had been buried and the methods used to conceal evidence of the crime. However, Torino's testimony also revealed the extent of the corruption that had protected the criminal organization for decades, implicating dozens of law enforcement officials, judges, and political figures who had received payments in exchange for their cooperation in covering up criminal activities and obstructing investigation that threatened the organization's operation. The explosive nature of these revelations created new dangers for everyone involved in the investigation, as the criminal organization moved quickly to eliminate potential witnesses and destroy evidence that might corroborate Torino's accusation, forcing Martinez and her allies to operate with even greater secrecy and caution. They worked to transform the information into actionable intelligence that could lead to arrests. Torino's declining health added urgency to the debriefing process, as his cancer was advancing rapidly and his ability to provide detailed testimony was diminishing with each passing, requiring the team to prioritize their questions and focus on the most critical information while ensuring that his statement properly documented and corroborated through independent evidence whenever possible. The informant's cooperation represented the breakthrough in the investigation and a potential disaster if his information fell into the wrong hands, as the organization would certainly take extreme measures to prevent his testimony from being used against them in court proceedings that could result in lengthy prison sentences or death penalties for their leadership. The intelligence provided by Torino's final confession opened new avenues of investigation, while simultaneously creating enormous risk for everyone involved in pursuing justice for Jessica Chen, as the information implicated powerful individuals who had the resources and motivation to eliminate threats to their freedom and criminal enterprises through violence or intimidation. Martinez found herself in possession of information that could potentially bring down an entire criminal organization and expose widespread corruption within Nevada's government and law enforcement agencies. But she also recognized that acting on this information would require resources and authority that were far beyond her capabilities as a single detective operating without official support or protection. The scope of the conspiracy revealed by Torino's testimony extended far beyond the murder of a single journalist to encompass decades of criminal activity involving drug trafficking, money laundering, political corruption, and the systematic elimination of witnesses and investigators opposed the organization operation, suggesting Chen's death was part of a larger pattern of criminal behavior that had claimed numerous victims' cases had never been solved or properly investigated. The information also revealed that the organization had been systematically infiltrating law enforcement agencies throughout the western United States, placing their associates in positions of authority where they could provide advance warning of investigation as evidence and redirect resources away from activities that threatened their operation, explaining why so many cases involving organized crime had resulted in failures or incomplete investigation. Martinez realized that pursuing the leads provided by Torino would require the involvement of federal agencies with the resources and authority to conduct complex investigations and protect witnesses from retaliation. But her previous experiences with corruption within the system made her reluctant to trust anyone within the official law enforcement structure with information that could be used to eliminate both Torino and herself if it fell into the wrong hands. The death of Vincent Torino in December 2004 marked both the end of Martinez's most reliable source of intelligence and the beginning of a new phase in the investigation that would finally lead to meaningful progress toward justice. Specific warden of the burial, along with description, physical reference, would allow him to locate the grave even after years of erosion and deliberate concealment efforts by the criminal organization. Torino's testimony had identified Tommy Castellano as the only surviving member of the original murder team, describing him as a reluctant participant who had been visibly disturbed by the killing of the innocent journalist and had subsequently distanced himself from the organization's more violent activities while maintaining his connections to their financial operation. Martinez recognized that Castellano represented their best hope for obtaining testimony from someone who had actually witnessed the crime, but approaching him would require careful planning and precise timing to avoid alerting the rest of the organization to the renewed intensity of the investigation and the specific threats Torino's information posed to their security. The intelligence provided by Torino's final confession had also revealed the existence of detailed records that the organization maintained about their including photographs of burial sites, victim identification information, and documentation of the methods used to conceal evidence, suggesting that Chen's murder is part of a systematic pattern of eliminating threats rather than an isolated incident motivated by specific circumstances. These records were reportedly maintained by the organization's leadership as insurance against betrayal by their subordinate and as operational references for future disposal activity, making them potentially invaluable evidence for prosecuting the organization's leaders, while also representing extremely dangerous information that could lead to the elimination of anyone who has knowledge of their existence. The challenge facing Martinez and her allies was determining how to locate and secure these records while avoiding detection by the organization's extensive surveillance and security operation, which had been designed specifically to protect exactly the type of investigation that had been pursuing Chen's killers for over a decade. The opportunity to move against Castellano came in early 2005 when federal investigators working an unrelated financial crimes case discovered evidence linking him to a complex money laundering operation that involved multiple legitimate businesses and offshore accounts, providing the legal basis for his arrest and the leverage needed to convince him to cooperate with the Chen investigation. Special Agent Lisa Park, who had replaced Chen as the FBI's lead investigator on organized crime cases in Nevada, recognized Castellanos' name from Martinez's files and realized that the financial charges could provide the pressure needed to flip him as a witness in the murder, while also demonstrating the government's commitment to pursuing justice, regardless of the time that had elapsed since the original crime. Working together, Martinez and Park developed a carefully orchestrated plan to arrest Castellano on the money laundering charges, while simultaneously presenting him with evidence of the government's knowledge about his involvement in Chen's murder, hoping to convince him that cooperation was his only chance to avoid spending the rest of his life in federal prison or facing execution for his role in the journalist's death. The operation required precise coordination between multiple agencies and careful timing to ensure that Castellano was isolated from any potential assistance or retaliation from his criminal associate, who would certainly view any cooperation with law enforcement as an act trail punishable by death according to the organization's traditional codes of conduct. The planning process also involved extensive research into Castellanos' personal life, family relationship, and psychological profile to identify potential pressure points and motivational factors that could be used to encourage his cooperation, while avoiding tackles him into silence or suicide rather than face the consequence of betraying his criminal associate. Intelligence gathering revealed that Castellano had been struggling with guilt over his involvement in Chen's murder for years, frequently seeking counseling for depression and anxiety, while maintaining a legitimate job as a construction foreman to distance himself from the organization's more violent activity, suggesting that he might be receptive to an approach that emphasized redemption and justice rather than punishment and retribution. The arrest took place on a quiet Tuesday morning in March 2005, as Castellano left his legitimate job as a construction foreman at a Las Vegas casino project, unaware that federal agents had been monitoring his movements for months and had chosen this moment when he was most vulnerable to approach without alerting his criminal associates to the government's interest in his activity. Agent Park and her team moved with military precision, surrounding Castellanos' vehicle at a traffic and extracting him before he could alert anyone to his situation or attempt to contact his criminal associates for assistance, using overwhelming force and rapid execution to prevent any possibility of escape or resistance. The initial interrogation took place at a secure federal facility outside Las Vegas, where Martinez and Park presented Castellano with the overwhelming evidence they had accumulated over 15 years of investigation, including Torino's confession, financial records linking him to the organization's activities, and forensic evidence placing him at the scene of Chen's abduction from the safe. The confrontation was emotionally charged, as Castellano initially maintained his innocence and claimed to have no knowledge of any crimes involving the missing journalist. But his demeanor changed dramatically when the investigators played audio recordings of Torino describing his specific role in the operation and his visible distress during the murder, forcing him to confront the reality that his former associate had provided detailed testimony about his crime. The interrogation strategy was carefully designed to exploit Castellanos' known psychological vulnerabilities while providing him with opportunities to demonstrate his remorse and willingness to cooperate, using a combination of evidence presentation, emotional appeals, and legal pressure to break down his resistance to providing testimony about the organization's activity. The investigators also presented him with evidence of the organization's recent efforts to eliminate potential witnesses and destroy evidence, emphasizing that his former associates viewed him as a liability rather than a trusted member of a criminal enterprise, making cooperation with law enforcement his best chance for survival, regardless of the legal consequences he might face for his past. The psychological pressure applied during the interrogation was carefully calibrated to exploit Castellanos' known weaknesses and moral conflict about his involvement in his murder, which Torino had identified as a source of ongoing guilt and psychological trauma that had affected his mental health and personal relations for over a decade. Martinez, drawing on her extensive experience in criminal psychology and interrogation technique, focused on the human cost of the crimes rather than the legal consequences Castellano faced, repeatedly returning to the image of Jessica Chen and her dedication to exposing corruption and seeking truth as a way of breaking down his emotional defenses and encouraging him to view cooperation as an act of redemption rather than betrayal. She presented him with examples of Chen's journalistic work, including articles about government corruption and organized crime, that demonstrated her commitment to justice and public service, while also describing the ongoing anguish of her sister Margaret, who had never stopped hoping for answers about Jessica's fate and deserved to know the truth about what had happened during her final hours. The strategy proved effective when Castellano broke down after 6 hours of interrogation, admitting his presence at the scene of the murder and expressing genuine remorse for his failure to intervene on behalf of the innocent journalist, though he continued to claim that he had been following orders and had not personally participated in the actual killing. His emotional breakdown was accompanied by detailed admissions about the organization's structure, the planning that had preceded Chen's abduction, and the systematic efforts to cover up the crime through the elimination of evidence and the intimidation of potential witnesses. The investigators recognized that they had achieved a crucial breakthrough, as Castellano's admissions provided the first direct testimony from a participant in the crime and opened the door to obtaining the detailed confession that would be necessary to prosecute the organization's leadership and locate Chen's remains. The formal confession process extended over several days as Castellano, now represented by a defense attorney who recognized the futility of maintaining his client's innocence in the face of overwhelming evidence, began providing detailed accounts of Jessica Chen's final hours and the subsequent cover-up operations that had sealed her murder for 15 years. His testimony revealed the cold-blooded calculation that had characterized the criminal organization's decision-making process, as the leadership had determined that eliminating the journalist was necessary to protect their money-laundering operations from exposure, and had ordered her death with no more consideration than they would give to any other business expense. Castellano's description of the murder was graphic and disturbing, involving psychological torment that had been designed to extract information about what Chen might have told her editor or other contacts before her abduction, and his detailed knowledge of the crime scene and disposal methods provided crucial information that would finally allow investigators to locate and recover the victim. Perhaps most importantly, his confession implicated several high-ranking members of the Lucchese organization who had ordered the murder and supervised the cover-up, providing prosecutors with the evidence they needed to file charges against the leadership figure that previously seemed beyond the reach of law enforcement. Tommy Castellano's complete confession unfolded over 6 grueling days of intensive interrogation, each recorded in high-definition video and witnessed by multiple law enforcement officials to ensure its admissibility in court and to protect against any later claims of coercion or misconduct by defense attorneys seeking to suppress testimony. The sessions took place in a sterile conference room at the Federal Building in Las Vegas, where Castellano sat across from Martinez and Park at a metal table, surrounded by boxes of evidence and surveillance photographs that documented 15 years of investigation into his criminal activities and those of his associates. His attorney, Michael Brennan, a respected criminal defense lawyer who specialized in organized crime cases, had advised his client that full cooperation represented his only realistic chance of avoiding the death penalty for his role in murdering an innocent journalist, and had negotiated a plea agreement that would result in life imprisonment without possibility of parole in exchange for complete and true testimony about Chen's killing and related criminal activity. The emotional toll of recounting the events of 1990 was evident in Castellano's physical deterioration throughout the process, as he aged visibly with session and began exhibiting symptoms of severe stress that required periodic break and medical monitoring to ensure his ability to continue testing. Intelligence gathering had revealed that Castellano had been struggling with guilt over his involvement in Chen's murder for years, frequently seeking counseling for depression and anxiety while maintaining a legitimate job to distance himself from the organization's more violent activity, making him receptive to an approach that emphasized redemption rather than punishment. The confession began with Castellano's description of the surveillance operation that had targeted Jessica Chen for several weeks before her murder, a sophisticated scheme that involved monitoring her journalistic investigation into money laundering and determining specific threats posed to the organization's financial activity in Nevada. Chen had been conducting research into suspicious financial transactions involving several casinos and related business, following a trail of evidence that led directly to the Lucchese family's money laundering network and threatening to expose operations that generated millions of dollars in illegal profits annually. The organization had learned about her corrupt source, who regularly provided it ongoing in exchange substantial monetary, giving them advance warning that allowed them to monitor Chen's progress and plan their response accordingly. Castellano described receiving orders from his supervisor, Joseph "Fat Tony" Marconi, to establish surveillance on the journalist and report on her activities, contacts, and planned movements, with particular attention to any meetings with potential sources or witnesses who might provide information about the organization's criminal activities. The surveillance operation had revealed that Chen was planning to meet with a confidential source in Denver who claimed to have documentary evidence of corruption involving Nevada state officials, prompting the organization's leadership to conclude that she had become too dangerous to be allowed to continue her investigation and that immediate action was required to eliminate the threat she represented to their operation. The actual murder had taken place at the remote location approximately 40 miles northeast of the Sagebrush Motel, in an abandoned mining camp that the organization had used for similar purposes on multiple previous occasions, where the isolation existing excavation site made it ideal for disposing of evidence and bodies without risk of discovery by law enforcement agencies or civilian witness. Castellano's description of transporting Chen to this location was chilling in its matter-of-fact recounting of her terror and his own emotional detachment during the journey, as he had followed the black Lincoln Continental carrying the journalist while maintaining radio contact with the execution team and ensuring that no other vehicles observed their convoy's movement into the desert. Chen had been forced to walk approximately half a mile from the vehicles to the actual execution site, with her hands bound behind her back and a hood over her head to prevent her from seeing the faces of her captors or the specific location where she would be killed, while her captors searched her belongings for any evidence of her investigation or contacts with law enforcement agents. The journalist had repeatedly pleaded for mercy and offered to abandon her investigation in exchange for her life, promising to leave Nevada and never publish anything of the organization's activities. But her captors had already received their orders and were not authorized to negotiate or show mercy regardless of her promises or the executioner, a professional killer known only as the Mechanic, who had been brought in from the organization's operations in Chicago, had shown no emotion as he prepared the execution site and explained to Chen exactly what was going to happen, using psychological torture as a method of extracting information about her sources and any evidence she might have shared with others before her abduction. The murder itself had been carried out with the cold efficiency that characterized the organization's approach to eliminating threats, with Chen being subjected to prolonged interrogation and torture before finally being shot, execution style, and buried in a grave that had been prepared in advance using industrial equipment to ensure that her remains would never be discovered by accidental search effort. Castellano's voice broke as he described the journalist's final moments, including her desperate attempts to convince her killers that she posed no real threat to their operation, and her final words, which had been a message for her sister, expressing her love and regret that she would never. The burial had been conducted according to established protocols that were designed to eliminate all forensic evidence and prevent discovery of the gravesite, including the use of lime, accelerate decomposition, multiple layers of industrial plastic contain odors, and careful restoration of the surface terrain to match the surrounding area and avoid detection by search teams or aerial. Following the murder, the organization had implemented a comprehensive cover-up operation that included the destruction of Chen's rental car, the elimination of witnesses who might have seen her at the motel, and the systematic suppression of the investigation through corruption and intimidation of law enforcement. Castellano provided detailed information about the specific individuals involved in each aspect of the cover-up, including the names of corrupt officials who had received payments to misdirect the investigation and the methods used to ensure that potential witnesses either remained silent or disappeared entirely, creating a wall of secrecy that had protected the organization from prosecution for over 15 years. The confession concluded with Castellanos' detailed description of the organization's disposal methods and burial site, including specific geographic coordinates for Chen's grave and information about other victims who had been killed and buried in the same general area over the course of several decades of criminal operation. His testimony revealed that the organization maintained detailed records of their disposal operations, including photographs of burial sites, victim identification information, and maps showing the locations of multiple graves, all stored in a secure facility that served as both an insurance policy against betrayal and an operational reference for future disposal activity. The information provided by Castellano would prove crucial not only for locating Chen's remains, but also for identifying other victims and building additional cases against the organization's leadership, as his detailed knowledge of their methods and locations allowed investigators to plan comprehensive recovery operations that would finally bring justice to multiple families who had lost loved ones to organized crime violence. Perhaps most importantly, his confession implicated several high-ranking members of the Lucchese organization, including the underboss who had personally ordered Chen's execution and the capos who had supervised the disposal operation, providing prosecutors the evidence they needed to file murder charges against the leadership figures who had directed the criminal enterprise from the safety of their legitimate business operation. The completion of Castellanos' confession marked a turning point in the investigation, transforming years of frustration and dead ends into concrete evidence that could finally be used to pursue justice for Jessica Chen and potentially dozens of other victims whose fates had been concealed by the organization's sophisticated cover-up. The systematic cover-up operation that sealed Jessica Chen's murder for 15 years was revealed through Castellanos' testimony, a master criminal planning that involved corruption at every level of Nevada's law enforcement and political establishment, demonstrating the organization's sophisticated understanding of the justice and their ability to manipulate for their own protection. Within hours of Chen's murder, corrupt officials within the Nevada State Police had been contacted and provided with detailed instructions about how to misdirect the investigation, including specific techniques for contaminating evidence, suppressing witness testimony, and creating false leads that would waste investigative resources while protecting the actual perpetrators from scrutiny. The operation had been coordinated by Anthony Big Tony Marconi, the organization's Nevada operation, who maintained a network of corrupted officials that included police detectives, state prosecutors, judges, and even federal agents who received regular payments in exchange for cooperation in protecting criminal activities from law enforcement interference. These corrupt officials had used their positions of authority to ensure that the Chen investigation would be conducted according to the organization's requirements, with evidence being lost or contaminated, witnesses being intimidated into silence, and investigative resources being redirected toward harmless targets that posed no threat to the criminal enterprise. The sophistication of the cover-up operation was evident in its multi-layered approach, which included not only the direct corruption of individual officials, but also the systematic manipulation of bureaucratic procedures, evidence handling protocols, and interagency communications to create an environment where legitimate investigation was virtually impossible despite the best efforts of honest law enforcement personnel like Detective Martinez. The financial aspects of the cover-up operation were particularly revealing, as Castellano provided detailed information about the specific payments made to corrupt officials and the methods used to conceal these transactions through legitimate businesses and shell companies that served as fronts for money laundering operations. Each corrupt official had been assigned a specific role in the cover-up and received compensation based on their level of authority and the risks they undertook in protecting the organization from prosecution, with payments ranging from a few $1,000s for low-level clerks who misplaced evidence to hundreds of thousands of dollars for judges and prosecutors who dismissed charges or suppressed testimony that might have exposed the criminal conspiracy. The payment system was administered through a sophisticated network of legitimate businesses that provided cover for the illegal transactions, including construction companies, restaurants, and consulting firms that issued fraudulent invoice and employment to justify the transfer of funds to corrupt officials without creating obvious evidence of bribery or corruption. Bank records subpoenaed as part of the investigation revealed that several prominent Nevada officials had received mysterious payments from these front companies throughout the 1990s and 2000, providing concrete evidence of their participation in the cover-up and creating additional leverage for prosecutors seeking to build cases against the organization's leadership. The financial trail also revealed the enormous costs associated with maintaining such an extensive corruption network, with the organization spending millions of dollars annually on bribes, payoffs, and other forms of illegal compensation to ensure their protection from law enforcement interference, demonstrating their recognition that corruption was a necessary business expense at just a significant investment to protect their much larger criminal. The technological aspects of the cover-up operation demonstrated the organization's sophisticated understanding of modern investigative techniques and their ability to stay ahead of law enforcement capabilities through the use of advanced counter-surveillance methods and evidence destruction techniques. Castellano revealed that the organization employed former law enforcement personnel and military specialists who understood exactly how criminal investigations were conducted and could provide detailed guidance about which evidence needed to be eliminated and which investigative techniques needed to be countered to prevent successful prosecution of their criminal acts. These specialists had developed comprehensive protocol crimes and cleanup, evidence destruction, and witness elimination were regularly up to account for advances in forensic science and investigative, ensuring that their method remained against the latest. The organization also maintained sophisticated electronic surveillance systems that monitored law enforcement communications and activities, providing advance warning of planned raids, surveillance operations, and other investigative activities that might threaten their security or expose their criminal operation. Navigation data from the organization's vehicle, recovered through court-ordered GPS tracking, revealed systematic patterns of movement that demonstrated their awareness of law enforcement activity and their ability to avoid detection through careful planning and real-time intelligence gathering about police operations. The electronic evidence also included tampered security camera footage from the Sagebrush Motel and surrounding areas, where the organization had either destroyed recordings or replaced them with edited versions that eliminated evidence of their presence during the time period when Chen was abducted and murdered. The witness intimidation and elimination program, revealed through Castellano's testimony, was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the cover-up, as it demonstrated the organization's willingness to commit additional murders and engage in systematic terrorism, protect their interests, and maintain their wall of silence around Chen's. Several potential witnesses who had been in the vicinity of the Sagebrush Motel on March 15, 1990, had been identified through surveillance footage and license plate records, and each had been systematically approached and either bribed into silence or eliminated entirely if they refused to cooperate with the cover-up effort. The organization had employed both direct violence and sophisticated psychological intimidation techniques to ensure witness compliance, including threats against family members, economic retaliation through business and employment networks, and the strategic use of accidents and suicide to eliminate the most dangerous witnesses while creating the appearance of natural causes or personal tragedy rather than organized crime violence. Bill Hendricks, the motel proprietor who had initially provided information about Chen's check-in, had been approached within days of the murder and offered a substantial payment to correct his statement to police, emphasizing that he had been mistaken about the timing of Chen's departure and had not seen any suspicious individuals or vehicle in the area during the relevant time period. When Hendricks had initially refused to change his statement, he had been subjected to escalating levels of intimidation, including vandalism of his property, threats against his elderly sister who lived in Las Vegas, and finally a direct threat against his own life that convinced him to cooperate with the organization's version of events and provide false testimony that misdirected the investigation away from the actual circumstance of Chen's disappearance. The corruption of the initial crime scene investigation was revealed to have been so thorough and systematic that virtually every piece of physical evidence that might have led to the organization's identification had been either destroyed, contaminated, or misinterpreted through the deliberate actions of corrupt officials who were being paid to protect the criminal enterprise from prosecution. Detective Frank Morrison, who had been the first investigator assigned to the Chen case, had received detailed instructions from his supervisor about which evidence to ignore, which leads to suppress, and which investigative techniques to avoid, all designed to create the appearance of a legitimate investigation while ensuring that no meaningful progress would be made toward identifying the actual perpetrator. Morrison had been paid $50,000 to lose crucial evidence, including Chen's personal belongings that had been found at the motel and might have contained fingerprints or other forensic evidence linking her to her killers, and an additional $25,000 to file false reports created an official record supporting the organization's preferred narrative about the journalist's disappearance. The evidence tampering extended beyond simple destruction to include the deliberate contamination of DNA samples, the alteration of timestamps on security footage, and the substitution of false witness statements for genuine testimony that might have provided useful information about the organization's activities in the area. Crime scene logs maintained by the corrupt investigators were revealed to contain numerous falsifications and omissions that were designed to conceal evidence of the organization's presence at the motel, while forensic reports had been altered to eliminate references to blood evidence, fingerprints, and other physical traces that might have provided leads for honest investigators to follow. The systematic nature of the evidence tampering is so extensive that it effectively created an entirely false narrative about Chen's disappearance, one that supported the organization's interest while making it virtually impossible for legitimate investigators to reconstruct the actual events or identify the responsible parties through conventional investigative methods. The culmination of 15 years of investigation came in the form of a massive coordinated operation that involved over 200 federal agents from multiple agencies working together to simultaneously arrest key members of the Lucchese organization while recovering Jessica Chen's and gathering the final evidence needed to dismantle the criminal enterprise that operated with impunity in Nevada for decades. Special Agent Park had spent months coordinating with the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force, the DEA, the U.S. Marshal Service, and specialized units from the Nevada State Police to plan an operation that would capture the organization's leadership before they could destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses who might testify against them in court proceedings. The operation, codenamed Desert Justice, was designed to strike simultaneously at multiple locations across Nevada and neighboring states, using the element of surprise to prevent the organization from implementing their emergency protocols for witness and evidence destruction that had protected them from previous law enforcement. Castellano's confession had provided detailed intelligence about the organization's structure, security measures, and contingency plan, allowing the task force to anticipate their likely responses and develop countermeasures that would neutralize their ability to escape violence. The timing of the operation was critical, as intelligence indicated that the organization was planning to relocate their operations to Mexico following rumors that their Nevada activities were being investigated by federal authorities, creating a narrow window of opportunity during which key figures could be arrested, evidence secured before it was destroyed, or moved beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement agents. The arrest of Anthony Big Tony Marconi, the organization's Nevada operations chief, took place at his legitimate business office in Las Vegas, where he was conducting a meeting with several subordinates when federal agents surrounded the building and executed simultaneous search and arrest warrants that had been secretly obtained through testimony provided by Castellano and corroborating evidence gathered through electronic surveillance. Marconi's capture was particularly significant because he had been the primary architect of the Chen murder and cover-up operation, and his arrest sent shockwaves through the organization's hierarchy as members realized that their most protected, powerful figure was now in federal custody. Charges that could result in the death penalty. The simultaneous arrest of 12 other key figures, including corrupt law enforcement officials, money laundering specialists, and enforcement personnel, effectively decapitated the organization's Nevada operations and eliminated their ability to coordinate resistance or retaliation against the government's instigation. Each arrest was conducted using overwhelming force and sophisticated surveillance to prevent escape attempts or the destruction of evidence, with federal agents seizing computers, financial records, and communications equipment that contained detailed information about the organization's criminal activities and corruption. The arrests were coordinated to occur within a 15-minute window, preventing any arrested individual from warning others and giving the organization no opportunity to implement their emergent security protocols or eliminate potential witnesses who might provide additional testimony against their former associates. The recovery of Jessica Chen's remains took place simultaneously with the arrest. As a specialized archaeologist led by Dr. Kim used the precise coordinates provided by Castellano to locate and carefully excavate the burial site where the journalist had been interred 15 years earlier. The excavation was conducted according to strict forensic protocols to ensure that all evidence would be admissible in court and that Chen's remains would be recovered with the dignity and respect that had been denied to her during her murder and burial by the criminal organization. The discovery of Chen's body, along with personal effects that confirmed her identity and provided additional forensic evidence linking her murder to the organization, represented the culmination of Detective Martinez's long struggle for justice and vindicated her refusal to abandon the case despite overwhelming obstacles and institutional pressure. The burial site also contained the remains of 3 other victims who had been killed by the organization over the course of several years, transforming the recovery operation into a major crime scene that would provide evidence for multiple murder prosecutions and bring closure to families who had been searching for missing loved ones for decades. Dr. Kim's careful archaeological work revealed details about the organization's disposal methods that corroborated Castellano's testimony and provided additional evidence of the systematic nature of their criminal operation, including the use of industrial equipment and chemical treatments that demonstrated their sophisticated approach to eliminating evidence and concealing their crimes from law enforcement agents. The evidence gathered during the operation exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of the investigators, as searches of the organization's facilities revealed extensive documentation of their criminal activities, including detailed records of murders, financial transactions, and corruption payments that provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence for multiple criminal cases. The seizure of computer systems and electronic storage devices yielded terabytes of data that documented decades of criminal activity, including encrypted communications between organization members, financial records showing the flow of illegal proceeds, and surveillance footage that had been collected by the organization for their own security purposes but now served as evidence of their guilt. Perhaps most significantly, investigators discovered the archive of disposal records that Castellano had described in his testimony, containing photographs, maps, detailed documentation of dozens of murders, and burial site that would allow law enforcement to solve numerous cold cases and provide closure to families who had been searching for missing relatives for years. The financial records revealed the full scope of the organization's corruption net, identifying dozens of public officials who had received illegal payments and providing the evidence needed to prosecute them for their roles in obstructing justice and protecting criminal activity. Navigation data recovered from the organization's vehicles confirmed the travel patterns described by Castellano and provided independent corroboration of his testimony about the timing and methods used in Chen's murder and disposal. The immediate aftermath of the operation saw the filing of federal charges against 47 individuals connected to the organization, including murder charges against Marconi and other key figures who had participated in Chen's killing, along with extensive racketeering, money laundering, and corruption charges that would effectively dismantle the criminal enterprise and ensure lengthy prison sentences. The evidence collected during the operation was so extensive and compelling that most defendants chose to negotiate plea agreements rather than face trial, providing additional testimony and evidence that further strengthened the government's cases and led to the identification of even more criminal activities and corrupt relations. The capture of the organization's leadership and the seizure of their assets represented a devastating blow to organized crime operations throughout the western United States, as the Lucchese family's Nevada network had served as a crucial hub for drug trafficking, money laundering, and other criminal activities that extended across multiple states and international borders. The success of the operation also served as a warning to other criminal organizations that law enforcement agencies possessed the capabilities and determination to pursue justice, regardless of the time required or the obstacles placed in their path by corruption and intimidation. The dismantling of the corruption network that had protected the organization for decades led to comprehensive reforms within Nevada's law enforcement agencies and created new oversight mechanisms designed to prevent future infiltration by criminal organizations seeking to corrupt the justice system for their own protection and profit. The trial of Anthony Big Tony Marconi and his co-conspirators became one of the most significant organized crime prosecutions in Nevada's history, attracting national media attention and providing a public forum for the detailed presentation of evidence that revealed the full scope of the criminal conspiracy that had protected Jessica Chen's killers for 15 years. Castellano's testimony as the prosecution's star witness was particularly compelling, as he provided first-hand accounts of the organization's criminal activities while expressing genuine remorse for his role in Chen's murder and the suffering it had caused her family and loved ones. The prosecution, led by attorney Rachel Morrison, methodically presented evidence that traced the conspiracy from its origins in the early 1990s through its eventual dismantling, using financial records, electronic surveillance, and witness testimony to build an overwhelming case that left no doubt about the defendant's guilt. The defense attorney's attempts to discredit Castellanos' testimony and challenge the admissibility of evidence were consistently unsuccessful, as the prosecution had carefully documented every aspect of their investigation and ensured that all evidence had been obtained through proper legal procedures that would withstand appellate scrutiny. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts, including first-degree murder charges against Marconi and several co-conspirators, resulting in multiple death sentences and life imprisonment terms that effectively ended the criminal careers of the organization's leadership and eliminated their ability to continue threatening witnesses or obstructing justice through intimidation and violence. The recovery and proper burial of Jessica Chen's remains provided a measure of closure to her family and friends who had endured 15 years of uncertainty and anguish while searching for answers about her fate and fighting to keep her case in the public consciousness. Margaret Chen Thompson, who had never stopped advocating for her sister, was present during the excavation of the burial site and served as the family's representative during the forensic identification process that confirmed Chen's identity and allowed for the return of her remains to her loved one. The funeral service, held at a Sacramento church where Chen had been a member during her childhood, attracted hundreds of mourners, including fellow journalists, law enforcement officers, and members of the public who had been moved by her story and the long struggle to achieve justice for her murder. Detective Martinez, who had devoted 15 years of her life to solving the case, delivered a eulogy that celebrated Chen's dedication to truth and justice while acknowledging the tragic cost of her commitment to exposing corruption and holding powerful interests accountable. The burial was attended by representatives from major news organizations throughout the country, who used the occasion to highlight the dangers faced by investigative journalists and the importance of protecting press freedom from intimidation and violence by those who prefer to operate in shadows and secret. The broader impact Chen case extended far beyond the prosecution of her individual killers, as the investigation had exposed systematic corruption within Nevada's law enforcement and political establishment that led to comprehensive reforms designed to prevent future infiltration by organized crime interests. The revelation that dozens of public officials had received illegal payments in exchange for their cooperation in protecting criminal activities prompted a complete overhaul of oversight procedures, ethics enforcement mechanisms, and interagency coordination protocols that were designed to identify and eliminate corruption before it could compromise the integrity of the justice. New legislation was enacted that strengthened penalties for official corruption, expanded the authority of Internal Affairs Unit to investigate suspicious activities, and created independent oversight bodies with the power to monitor law enforcement agents and ensure compliance with ethical standards and professional conduct requirements. The financial investigation that had revealed the organization's extensive bribery network also led to the recovery of millions of dollars in assets that were forfeited to the government and used to establish victim compensation funds and enhanced law enforcement training programs focused on organized crime investigation techniques and corruption prevention. The case became a model for other jurisdictions facing similar challenges with organized crime infiltration, demonstrating that determined investigators armed with appropriate resources and legal authority could successfully dismantle even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises and their protective corruption network. Detective Martinez, whose career had been nearly destroyed by her refusal to abandon the Chen investigation, was ultimately vindicated by the case's successful resolution and received numerous commendations and awards recognizing her dedication to justice and her professional excellence in pursuing one of the most complex criminal investigations in Nevada's history. The psychological evaluation that had nearly ended her career was revealed to have been compromised by Dr. Webb's financial connections to the criminal organization, leading to his own prosecution for obstruction of justice and the establishment of new protocols for ensuring the independence and integrity of psychological evaluation used in law enforcement personnel decisions. Martinez was promoted to detective captain and given authority to establish a new cold case unit specifically focused on investigating unsolved murders and disappearances that might be connected to organized crime activities, using the expertise techniques developed during the Chen investigation to pursue justice for other victims whose cases had been neglected or deliberately pressed. Her marriage to James Martinez was irreparably damaged by the years of separation and conflict, but she found personal fulfillment in her work and in the knowledge that her sacrifice had ultimately led to justice for Jessica Chen and numerous other victims whose cases were solved using intelligence gathered during the investigation. The case also established Martinez as a national expert on organized crime investigation and corruption, leading to consulting opportunities and speaking engagements that allowed her to share her knowledge and experience with law enforcement agencies throughout the country. The emotional impact a case's resolution was perhaps most evident in the reactions of those who had been directly affected by Jessica Chen's murder and the long struggle to achieve justice. As family members, colleagues, and investigators experienced a complex mixture of relief, satisfaction, lingering sadness so long. Margaret Thompson, who had devoted 15 years of her life to keeping her sister's case in the public eye and supporting the investigation effort, expressed gratitude for the resolution, while acknowledging that no amount of justice could truly compensate the loss of her sister or the years of uncertainty and pain that the family had endured. The journalism community honored Chen's memory by establishing an investigative reporting award in her name, recognizing reporters who demonstrated courage and persistence in exposing corruption and holding powerful interests accountable despite personal risk and professional obstacles. The case also prompted important discussions within the news media about the safety and security of investigative journalists, leading to enhanced training programs, improved security protocols, and increased cooperation between news organizations and law enforcement agencies protecting reporters who were investigating dangerous subjects or criminal activity. While the successful prosecution of Chen's killers provided a measure of justice and closure, the case also served as a sobering reminder of the ongoing threats faced by those who choose to challenge corruption and criminal activity, and the importance of protecting and supporting individuals who risk their lives in pursuit of truth and accountability in democratic society, where press freedom and investigative journalism serve as essential safeguards against abuse, power, and criminal conspiracy.